year 1859, long before people spoke about rights or freedom for women, there was a small European town surrounded by fields, stone roads, and old beliefs that had not changed for generations. Life there was simple on the surface, but cruel underneath. People feared anything different. They trusted tradition more than truth. It was in this town that Seraphina first became known, not because she wanted attention, but because attention came to her, whether she asked for it or not. Seraphina was born into a poor family. Her father worked irregular labor jobs, and her mother washed clothes for wealthier households. They lived in a narrow house with cracked walls and a leaky roof. From a young age, Seraphina helped her mother and never complained. She was quiet, respectful, and kind. Nothing about her behavior invited trouble, yet from childhood, people noticed something unusual about her. Her face had a calm beauty that felt almost unreal. Her eyes were soft but deep, and when she looked at someone, it felt as if she truly saw them. Even as a girl, strangers paused when she passed. At first, people spoke kindly about her. Neighbors said she would grow into a fine lady if fate allowed. But kindness in that town never lasted long. As Seraphina entered her late teens, admiration slowly changed into discomfort. Men stared longer than they should. Women noticed this and grew uneasy. Wives pulled their husbands closer when Seraphina walked by. Mothers whispered to their daughters to stay away from her, not because she was rude or immoral, but because she was too beautiful. Seraphina did not dress boldly. She wore simple clothes like everyone else. She kept her head down and avoided attention, yet attention followed her. When she went to the market, sellers watched her nervously. When she attended church, eyes turned toward her instead of the altar. She began to feel that her presence caused tension in the air, like a storm that had not yet broken. By 1859, rumors had begun. People said men lost their sense around her. Others claimed she did not even need to speak to influence them. These stories were exaggerated, but in a town ruled by fear, exaggeration became truth. One married man was seen helping her carry a basket once, and within days people said he was obsessed with her. When another young man wrote her a letter she never answered, his rejection turned into anger, and his anger turned into gossip. Seraphina heard these whispers but did not understand them. She blamed herself in quiet ways, wondering if she had smiled too much or walked too slowly. She tried to make herself smaller, quieter, less noticeable, but the harder she tried to disappear, the more people talked about her. In their eyes, her silence became mysterious, her calm became suspicious. The church elders noticed the growing tension. They spoke about temptation during sermons, about women who led men astray without intention. Though Seraphina's name was never spoken, everyone knew who they meant. Some began to believe she was a test sent by God. Others believed she was something darker. No one asked her what she felt or what she wanted. She was discussed as an idea, not a human being. The moment everything truly changed came when a respected local official was rumored to have visited her street more than once. There was no proof that he ever spoke to her, but his sudden coldness toward his family needed an explanation. The town chose the easiest one. Seraphina became the cause. In their minds, her beauty had power, and power needed control. From that point on, people stopped seeing her as a girl. They saw her as a problem. Shopkeepers became distant. Neighbors avoided greeting her. Children were pulled away when she passed. The warmth she once felt in her town disappeared, replaced by looks filled with judgment and fear. Seraphina felt the change deeply. She sensed that something invisible had shifted against her. Nights became restless. Her parents noticed her silence, but were powerless to protect her. Poverty had already placed them low in society. Now fear had placed them lower. By the end of 1859, her name was no longer spoken with curiosity, but with warning. People said, "Be careful of her," without ever explaining why.
No crime had been committed, no sin proven, yet in the minds of many, Seraphina's existence itself had become a threat. That year marked the moment when Seraphina stopped being a person in the eyes of the town and became a symbol of something they feared and did not understand. It was the year she was noticed, and the year her fate quietly began to close around her, like a door locking without a sound. After the year Seraphina was noticed, life in the town did not return to normal. Instead, it grew heavier and more uncomfortable with each passing month. What had once been quiet whispers now became open suspicion. People no longer pretended that nothing was wrong. They had decided, without saying it clearly, that Seraphina's beauty was not a gift, but a danger. Everywhere she went, she felt watched, not admired anymore, but measured, judged, blamed. When she walked through the market, conversations stopped. When she stood in line at the bakery, women shifted away from her as if she carried an illness. Men avoided looking at her directly, yet their silence was filled with tension. It was as if the entire town expected something bad to happen simply because she existed among them. Seraphina tried to live carefully. She changed her walking routes, avoided crowded places, and limited her time outside. She stopped going to church regularly because she felt eyes burning into her back. Her mother begged her to stay indoors as much as possible, hoping the town would eventually forget. But forgetting was not what they wanted. They wanted control. Stories about Seraphina grew darker and stranger. People said she could make men restless just by standing nearby. Some claimed she smiled on purpose to cause trouble. Others insisted she knew exactly what she was doing and enjoyed the chaos around her. None of these people had ever spoken to her. Truth was no longer important. Fear had replaced it. One incident pushed everything further. A young merchant, known for his calm nature, suddenly began acting recklessly. He drank more, argued with customers, and lost money. Someone mentioned that he had once seen Seraphina passing his shop. That was enough. Soon the town decided she was the reason his life had fallen apart. No one asked if he had debts, stress, or personal struggles. Blaming Seraphina was easier. Women in the town began speaking openly against her. They said she threatened marriages and families. Mothers warned their daughters that beauty like hers brought ruin. Ironically, Seraphina herself had never been courted properly, never promised anything, never chosen by anyone. Yet she was accused of destroying homes she had never entered. Local authorities began paying attention, not because they cared about justice, but because disorder frightened them. A town that felt uneasy was hard to control. Instead of calming the situation, officials listened to the loudest voices. They met privately, discussing Seraphina not as a citizen, but as a problem to be solved. The most painful part was that Seraphina sensed the shift clearly. She felt the town turning against her like a slow tide. Friends she once greeted no longer spoke to her. Even distant relatives avoided her family. Her father lost work opportunities without explanation. Her mother was treated coldly by women who once relied on her services. Punishment spread quietly, without laws or announcements. Seraphina blamed herself in silence. She wondered if being born different was her fault. She questioned whether beauty was something she should be ashamed of. At night, she stared at her reflection, wishing she could change her face, her eyes, her presence, anything to make the fear stop. The church elders increased their sermons about temptation and sin. Though no names were mentioned, the meaning was clear. People left church looking at Seraphina with renewed certainty. In their minds, moral danger had a face now, and it was hers. One evening, a group of men followed her at a distance as she returned home. They did not touch her or speak, but their presence was a warning. Seraphina walked faster, her heart pounding, realizing she was no longer safe in the place she had grown up. Behind closed doors, discussions became more serious. Some suggested sending her away. Others argued that removing her quietly would restore peace. There were even voices saying she needed to be restrained, protected from the world, and the world protected from her. These ideas, once unthinkable, now sounded reasonable to frightened minds. No one asked Seraphina what she wanted. No one offered protection or understanding. She had not committed a crime, yet she was being treated like one waiting to happen. By the end of that period, the town had fully accepted a dangerous idea that beauty could be a crime and that a woman could be punished for the feelings of others. Seraphina was no longer seen as innocent or harmless. She was labeled a disturbance, a temptation, a risk. This was the moment when fear turned into justification. The town convinced itself that whatever happened next would be necessary, and Seraphina, still quiet, still gentle, stood unaware that her life was about to be taken from her, not by violence, but by decision. Her beauty had become her sentence, and the people who once watched her in silence were now preparing to act.
The night Seraphina was taken came quietly, without warning. There were no shouts in the street, no crowd gathered outside her door. That silence made it worse. It felt planned, careful, and final. The town did not want witnesses. They wanted the problem removed without noise, like a stain wiped away before morning. It was late when the knock came, not loud, but firm. Her parents woke first. Her father opened the door to find two local guards and a town official standing under the weak light of a lantern. Their faces were serious, but not angry. That frightened him more than rage would have. They said they needed Seraphina to come with them for questioning. No papers were shown. No charge was named. When her mother asked what her daughter had done, the official avoided her eyes and said, "This is for everyone's good." Seraphina stood frozen in the doorway, wrapped in a thin shawl. She felt as if the air itself had turned heavy. She wanted to ask questions, but no words came out. Deep inside, she already sensed that this was not a simple visit. Her mother tried to hold her, crying softly, but a guard stepped forward and gently separated them. There was no violence, only control. That control made everything feel hopeless. As Seraphina was led away, she looked back once. Her parents stood in the doorway, powerless and small. That image stayed with her long after the door closed behind her. They did not take her to a jail. They did not take her to the town hall. Instead, they walked her beyond the familiar streets, past the edge of town where few people went at night. The road was rough and uneven. The lantern light shook with every step. No one spoke. The guards avoided looking at her, as if eye contact itself was dangerous. After a long walk, they reached an old estate surrounded by iron gates. It had once belonged to a wealthy family, but had been abandoned years ago. Locals whispered that it was now used for special cases. The building looked empty from the outside, but inside, there were rooms prepared for confinement. Seraphina was brought into a small stone chamber with a single window high above the floor. The air smelled damp and cold. Before she could understand what was happening, iron cuffs were placed around her ankles. The sound of metal closing echoed through the room like a final decision. She gasped, not because the chains hurt, but because of what they meant. She asked why this was happening. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. The official replied calmly that she was not being punished, she was being protected. Protected from men's attention, protected from causing further harm, protected from herself. His words made no sense, yet he spoke them with complete confidence, as if repeating something he had already told himself many times. Seraphina cried then, not loudly, but deeply. She begged them to let her go home, promising she would leave town, hide herself, do anything they asked. No one answered her. One by one, they turned and left the room, locking the door behind them. The silence afterward was crushing. For the first time in her life, Seraphina was truly alone. She sat on the cold floor, her ankles heavy with iron, trying to understand how her life had changed in a single night. She had not stolen, lied, or hurt anyone, yet she was chained like a criminal. Hours passed, maybe days. Time felt broken inside those walls. Eventually, a woman came to bring her food and water. She avoided conversation, placing the items down quickly and leaving. When Seraphina tried to speak, the woman shook her head as if conversation itself was forbidden. Outside, the town slept easier. People told themselves that order had been restored. Wives felt calmer. Officials felt relieved. They believed they had made a difficult but necessary choice. Some even praised the decision as wise. No one spoke about Seraphina's tears or her fear. Those details were inconvenient. Inside the chamber, Seraphina replayed every moment of her life, searching for the mistake that had led her there. She wondered if being born beautiful was a sin. She wondered if silence had been a crime. Most of all, she wondered if anyone would come for her. Days turned into weeks. No trial came. No explanation followed. Her name was removed from conversation, as if speaking it might bring trouble back. Her parents were warned not to ask questions. They were told their daughter was being cared for and that pushing further would only make things worse. Seraphina's body remained still, but her mind slowly broke under the weight of confusion. The chains were not tight, but they were always there, reminding her that freedom had been taken without permission. She learned to move carefully, to sit for long hours, to listen to the sound of her own breathing. The worst pain was not physical. It was the knowledge that her life had been decided by others who never tried to understand her. She had been taken not because of what she did, but because of what others felt. That night, the night they took her away, marked the true beginning of Seraphina's imprisonment. It was the moment when fear became action, when gossip turned into iron, and a young woman disappeared from the world without leaving a mark behind. She did not know it yet, but those chains would remain for years, and the town that believed it had solved a problem had in truth created a tragedy that could never be undone.
Life inside the estate settled into a slow, cruel routine. After the first shock faded, Seraphina realized that this place was not meant for quick punishment. It was designed for waiting, waiting without answers, waiting without time, waiting until a person slowly forgot who they once were. Her room never changed. The stone walls stayed damp. The small window high above her head allowed only a thin line of daylight, never enough to warm the room or show the sky clearly. She could not tell the weather, the season, or even the month. Morning and night felt almost the same. The only difference was the weak light that appeared and disappeared. The chains remained on her ankles at all times. They were not pulled tight, but they were heavy. Every movement reminded her that she was restrained. At first, she tried to walk carefully, hoping someone would see her calm behavior and realize the chains were unnecessary. But no one came to observe her actions with fairness. The chains were not there because she was dangerous. They were there because people believed she might be. Food arrived twice a day. A woman or sometimes a man would enter silently, place the bowl on the floor, and leave without meeting her eyes. Seraphina tried to speak at first. She asked questions politely. She begged for news of her parents. Most of the time, she received no reply. When someone did speak, it was only to say, "Be quiet," or "This is for the best." Slowly, Seraphina understood something painful. This was not a prison with rules or laws. It was a place of hiding. She was hidden away so the town would not have to think about her. No guards stood outside her door constantly. No records were updated. She existed in a space between being alive and being erased. Occasionally, visitors arrived. Doctors, officials, or men with notebooks would enter her room. They never asked her how she felt. They did not ask about her health or her fears. They studied her face, her posture,
her silence. Some whispered to each other, others wrote notes while watching her closely, as if she were an object. They spoke about her as if she could not hear. They discussed how men reacted to her presence. They wondered aloud whether isolation reduced her influence. No one questioned whether the influence was real or imagined. Their concern was not truth, but comfort. Seraphina learned to sit still during these visits. She stopped crying in front of them. She stopped defending herself. She realized that showing emotion only made them more certain she was unstable. Silence, she hoped, might convince them she was harmless. Time stretched endlessly. Days blended together. Her body weakened from lack of movement, but her mind suffered more. Thoughts became heavy and slow. Sometimes she spoke to herself just to hear a human voice. Other times she stayed silent for days, afraid her voice would disappear completely. She thought often about her parents. She imagined her mother setting aside food for her, waiting for news. She imagined her father standing quietly, unable to protect his daughter. These thoughts hurt, but they were also the only things that reminded her she had once belonged somewhere. The estate itself felt empty, but she could hear distant sounds at times, doors closing far away, footsteps echoing briefly. She wondered how many others had been hidden here before her. No one answered. What confused her most was the way people treated her beauty. They did not insult it, they feared it. They spoke of it as something powerful and unnatural. Some visitors seemed almost uncomfortable standing near her, as if being too close might change them. This made Seraphina feel less than human, like a story people told each other instead of a real woman. Months passed, maybe years, she could not tell. Her reflection faded from her memory. She stopped caring about her appearance because it no longer belonged to her. The face that had caused all this trouble now felt like a stranger's. There were moments when hope tried to rise. Once she overheard two officials arguing outside her door. One said the situation was extreme. Another replied that peace was more important than fairness. Their footsteps faded, and nothing changed. Hope learned to be quiet. Seraphina's greatest fear was not that she would die there, but that she would be forgotten. Forgotten by her parents, forgotten by the town, forgotten by herself. She held on to small memories, sunlight on stone streets, her mother's voice, the sound of church bells, to remind herself that the world still existed beyond the walls. Inside that hidden chamber, Seraphina was alive, but her life was paused. The world moved forward without her. Laws changed, people aged, children were born. Yet she remained chained in the same place, punished not for what she had done, but for what others imagined. This was a prison without bars in the eyes of the law, but for Seraphina it was the most complete kind of captivity. No trial, no sentence, no end date, just silence, stone, and the slow loss of everything that once made her feel human. And as the years continued to pass unnoticed, the town outside congratulated itself for restoring order, never realizing that the cost of that comfort was a young woman slowly disappearing behind locked doors.
Time inside the estate did not move the way it did outside. For Seraphina, it became something shapeless and cruel. Days no longer followed nights clearly. Weeks blended into months, and months slipped quietly into years. She stopped trying to count. Counting only reminded her how long she had already lost. At first, she waited for someone to come and explain everything. She believed there had been a mistake. Surely someone would review her case, read the truth, and let her go. That hope kept her awake at night, listening for footsteps that never came. But as seasons passed without change, hope slowly weakened. The chains were still there. They rubbed against her skin, leaving marks that never fully healed.
Her body learned to move around them, to accept their weight as normal. What once felt shocking now felt expected. That frightened her more than the chains themselves. She realized she was learning to live without freedom. Seraphina spoke less and less. At first, she had talked to herself, repeating memories so they would not fade. She described her childhood aloud, her parents' faces, the streets of her town. But even words grew tired. Silence slowly took their place. Silence became safer. Silence did not disappoint. People still came to observe her, though less often now. When they did, they seemed almost disappointed that nothing had changed. She was calm. She did not scream. She did not resist. Some whispered that the isolation was working. Others said she had always been quiet, which only made her more unsettling to them. No one asked whether 10 years of silence might break any human being. Her body aged quietly. The young girl taken from her home slowly disappeared. Her hair lost its shine. Her posture bent slightly from long hours sitting or standing still. Lines formed on her face, not from laughter or life, but from endurance. She sometimes touched her face, trying to recognize the woman she was becoming. The hardest part was the loneliness. Humans are not meant to exist without connection, without conversation, without touch, without choice. Seraphina felt herself drifting inward, away from the world. Some days she barely felt real. She wondered if she would fade completely if no one spoke her name. She dreamed often. In her dreams she walked freely through fields, her chains falling away with each step. She heard her mother's voice calling her name. She woke from these dreams with tears on her face, the cold stone reminding her that freedom still belonged only to sleep. Outside the estate, the town moved on. New families arrived. Old arguments were forgotten. For many, Seraphina became a vague memory, a story whispered years ago. "Do you remember the girl?" some asked. Others shook their heads. The fear that once felt urgent had settled into quiet satisfaction. The problem, they believed, had been solved. Seraphina's parents aged with grief. They were allowed rare messages saying their daughter was alive and being cared for. They were never allowed to see her. Over time, even they were encouraged to stop asking questions. The town wanted closure, not truth. Inside the chamber, Seraphina began to change in ways no one could see. She stopped feeling anger. Anger required energy, and she had none left to give. She stopped feeling fear. Fear needed something to escape from, and there was nowhere to go. What remained was a deep, heavy calm that wrapped around her like fog. She learned to sit for hours without moving. She learned to exist inside her thoughts. She repeated simple routines in her mind to keep herself steady. Eat, breathe, sleep, wake, survive. Sometimes she wondered if the town had been right. Maybe she truly was dangerous, not because of her beauty, but because people could be so easily convinced to destroy someone who never fought back. That thought scared her. It meant anyone could be taken like her. Years passed this way. 10 years is a long time, but when each day is the same, time loses meaning. Seraphina no longer imagined a future. She lived only in the present moment, because the future hurt too much to think about. The chains became part of her identity, not just metal, but a reminder of how easily a life could be stopped. She was alive, yet her life had been paused while the world continued without her permission. What the town never understood is that silence is not peace. Silence can hide suffering so deep it leaves no sound behind. Seraphina did not scream, not because she accepted her fate, because screaming had nowhere to go. By the time 10 years had nearly passed, the woman inside the chamber was no longer the girl taken from her home. She had been shaped by isolation, worn down by waiting, and taught that obedience did not bring mercy. She was still breathing, still thinking, still human, but something essential had been taken from her, something that could never be fully returned. And as the 10th year approached, change was coming, though Seraphina did not know it yet. The silence that had held her for so long was about to be questioned, not by kindness, but by curiosity. And sometimes, curiosity is the first crack in even the strongest chains.
Change did not arrive with kindness or apology. It arrived quietly, carried by a man who did not expect to find what he found. He was young compared to the others who had visited the estate over the years, a legal reformer sent by higher authorities to inspect old institutions, forgotten cases, and unused properties. His task was simple on paper: review records, confirm conditions, and report anything unusual. He did not come looking for Seraphina. He did not even know her name when he arrived. The estate surprised him. It was still being used, though barely mentioned in official documents. When he asked about it, local officials spoke carefully. They said it held special cases that required discretion. That word, discretion, made him curious. He asked to see the records. The records were thin, too thin. Names were missing, dates were unclear. One entry stood out: a woman confined for reasons described only as social disturbance. No crime listed, no sentence length, no court decision. Just a note saying isolation was necessary for public order. The reformer frowned. That was not how the law was supposed to work, even by the standards of the past. He asked to see her. The request made people uncomfortable. They warned him she was unusual, that she caused trouble without meaning to, that seeing her might distract him from his duties. These warnings sounded more like superstition than fact. He insisted. When the door to Seraphina's chamber opened, the reformer was not prepared for what he saw. He expected someone violent, unstable, or broken beyond recognition. Instead, he saw a woman sitting quietly near the wall, her ankles chained, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She looked up slowly. Her face was pale but composed. Her eyes were tired but clear. There was no madness there, no aggression, only a deep, practiced stillness. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The reformer noticed the chains first. They shocked him. He asked how long she had been restrained like this. The guard answered casually, years, no exact number, as if years were nothing. He stepped closer and spoke to her directly, something few had done. He asked her name. Her voice was soft when she answered. She had not spoken to someone who truly listened in a very long time. He asked why she was there. Seraphina hesitated, not because she did not know, but because the answer had never made sense. She said they told her it was for protection. She said she had never been tried or accused of a crime. She said she had been waiting for someone to explain. The reformer listened. The more she spoke, the more disturbed he became. Her words were calm, not desperate. She was not trying to convince him emotionally. She was simply telling the truth as she lived it. He asked about her behavior before confinement. She described her quiet life, her family, the rumors. Nothing criminal, nothing violent, just fear. Fear that had grown into certainty without evidence. When he left the room, his expression had changed. He reviewed the records again, this time carefully. He searched for missing documents, older orders, signatures that should have been there. He found none. What he found instead was a pattern. Decisions made in private, notes written vaguely, responsibility passed quietly from one official to another.
No one person had ordered Seraphina's imprisonment. Everyone had simply agreed not to stop it. That disturbed him more than a clear crime would have. He returned to Seraphina's chamber again the next day. He brought questions, not accusations. He asked about her health, her mind, her memories. He asked what she wanted. That question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in 10 years. She answered honestly. She wanted to see the sky without bars. She wanted to walk without chains. She wanted to know if her parents were alive. She did not ask for revenge. She asked for recognition. The reformer realized something important then. The story he had heard, the dangerous woman, the irresistible beauty, did not exist. It had never existed. It was a story created to make fear sound reasonable. He began to speak to others involved, doctors, officials, guards. Many avoided him. Some defended their actions weakly. Others admitted they had simply followed what had already been done. It was easier, one man said quietly, easier than questioning the past. The reformer prepared a report. It was long and detailed. He described the lack of legal process. He described the psychological damage caused by isolation. He described Seraphina not as a myth, but as a human being. He did not accuse the town directly. Instead, he accused the system that allowed fear to replace law. He sent the report upward, knowing it would cause discomfort, but discomfort was necessary. While waiting for a response, he returned once more to Seraphina. He told her he believed her, that her case was being reviewed, that change might come. She listened quietly. She had learned not to trust hope easily. But something in his voice was different. It was steady, honest. He did not promise freedom. He promised truth. That night, Seraphina lay awake longer than usual. For the first time in years, her thoughts moved forward instead of in circles. Someone had questioned the story that held her captive. Someone had seen her as she truly was. Outside the chamber, the wheels of authority began to turn slowly, reluctantly. Old decisions were being reopened, forgotten papers were being searched for, and a silence that lasted 10 years was finally being disturbed. Part 6 was not the end of Seraphina's suffering, but it was the beginning of something just as powerful. It was the moment when the story told about her started to crack. And once a story cracks, it can no longer hold someone prisoner forever.
The process of uncovering the truth moved slowly, but once it began, it could not be stopped. The reformer's report did not create instant justice. Instead, it created discomfort, and discomfort forced people to look where they had avoided looking for years. Higher authorities requested more information. Old files were pulled from storage. Dusty records were opened, many for the first time in decades. Clerks searched for court orders, trial notes, medical evaluations, anything that could explain why Seraphina had been held for so long. What they found was silence on paper, just as deep as the silence she had lived in. There was no signed sentence, no official ruling, no law that justified chains on a woman who had committed no crime. Every document used careful, empty language, necessary, protective, temporary. Temporary had lasted 10 years. As the truth began to surface, responsibility became unclear. Local officials claimed they had acted on advice from church elders. The elders said they had only warned about moral danger, not imprisonment. Doctors insisted they were observers, not decision-makers. Everyone pointed elsewhere. No one wanted ownership of the harm. The reformer returned to the estate again, this time with permission to question people directly. Guards were nervous. Some admitted they had always felt uneasy, but were told not to ask questions. One elderly caretaker quietly confessed that Seraphina had never shown signs of violence or instability. She was the calmest one here, he said. Too calm, maybe, like someone who gave up.
That sentence stayed with the reformer. Meanwhile, word began to spread, quietly at first. A woman chained for 10 years because of rumors, because of fear, because people were uncomfortable. The story disturbed those who heard it. Some reacted with shame, others with denial. It wasn't like that, they said. It was necessary at the time. But necessity sounded weak when measured against a decade of stolen life. Officials debated what to do next. Releasing Seraphina would mean admitting failure, admitting that fear had replaced justice. Some worried about public reaction, others worried about their own reputations. For days, discussions went in circles. During this time, Seraphina felt the change without fully understanding it. Visitors came more often. Her name was spoken clearly now, not avoided. She was asked the same questions repeatedly by different people. Each time she answered calmly. She had no anger left to weaponize. She told the truth plainly, as it was. One day, they removed the chains from her ankles, only temporarily, they said, for examination. The sound of metal unlocking made her hands shake, not from joy, but from disbelief. She stood slowly, unsteady on legs that had forgotten freedom. Even when the chains were off, she did not move far. Years of restraint had taught her caution. Doctors examined her then, truly examined her, not her beauty or her presence, but her health. They noted muscle weakness, emotional withdrawal, signs of long-term isolation. These findings went into official reports. For the first time, her suffering was written down as fact, not dismissed as imagination. The conclusion became unavoidable. Seraphina had been wronged. A formal review declared her confinement unjustified. The language was careful, apologetic without saying sorry. The state acknowledged that no legal grounds had ever existed for her imprisonment. The decision to release her was approved quietly, without ceremony. No one celebrated. When the reformer informed Seraphina, she did not react immediately. She listened, nodded once, and asked a simple question. "Is it real?" He said yes. She closed her eyes for a long time. When she opened them, tears ran down her face, but she did not cry out. Even relief felt heavy after so much loss. Preparations were made quickly. Officials wanted the matter resolved before it attracted too much attention. There would be no public announcement, no apology delivered aloud. She would simply leave. The night before her release, Seraphina did not sleep. She sat quietly, touching the bare skin around her ankles, still marked by years of iron. She tried to imagine the outside world. She tried to imagine walking without permission. The idea felt unreal, like a dream she was afraid to wake from. When morning came, the door opened fully for the first time. No guard stood in her way. She was given simple clothes, cleaner than what she had worn inside. The reformer walked with her through the halls of the estate. Each step felt uncertain. The walls that had held her for so long seemed to watch silently as she passed. Outside, the air felt sharp and overwhelming. The sky was wide, too wide. Seraphina had to stop and breathe. Freedom, she realized, was not light. It was heavy with everything she had missed. As she left the grounds, there were no crowds, no witnesses, just a few officials watching quietly, relieved the problem was leaving with her. Behind her, the estate remained standing, its secrets sealed again. Ahead of her, a world waited that no longer felt familiar. The truth had been exposed, the chains were gone, the decision was official. But justice, Seraphina knew, was more than release. Justice would have been time returned, youth restored, a life uninterrupted. What she received instead was freedom marked by absence. And yet, as she stepped away from the place that had erased 10 years of her existence, one thing was undeniable. The lie that had held her captive was finally broken, and once broken, it could never fully trap her again.
Seraphina left the estate quietly, without any announcement, without any crowd to witness what had been done to her. Freedom did not arrive with joy or celebration. It arrived slowly, like a stranger she did not yet trust. Each step away from the gates felt unreal, as if she might be called back at any moment and told there had been a mistake. The world outside was louder than she remembered. Sounds felt sharp. Wind against her skin made her pause. The sky seemed too wide, almost frightening. For 10 years, her life had been measured in stone walls and iron chains. Now there were no limits, and that freedom felt heavy instead of light. She was taken to a small place to rest, away from the town that had condemned her. Officials believed it was better if she did not return there. They said it was for her safety, but Seraphina understood the truth. The town did not want to see what it had done. Her presence would have been a reminder, and reminders make people uncomfortable. She learned simple things again: how to walk longer distances without pain, how to sleep without listening for footsteps, how to speak without lowering her voice. These things had once been natural, but now they required effort. Freedom had muscles she had not used in years. At night, memories returned without warning: the sound of chains, the silence of her room, the way time had disappeared. She woke often, unsure where she was. The past did not release her just because the doors had opened. People around her treated her carefully, too carefully. They avoided asking questions. They avoided mentioning the years she lost. They offered kindness, but it felt distant, unsure. No one knew how to speak to a woman who had been erased and then returned. Seraphina asked about her parents. The answer came slowly and gently. Her mother had passed away during her confinement. Her father lived, but aged and broken by grief. The news struck her deeper than any chain ever had. She had dreamed of seeing them again, of stepping into their arms. Now only one remained, and even that reunion felt uncertain. When she finally saw her father, words failed both of them. He looked at her as if she were a memory made real. They held each other for a long time, saying nothing. There was no way to speak about the years between them. Those years belonged to silence. Seraphina never returned to the town that had feared her. She did not seek revenge. She did not demand apologies. What would they have changed? Time would not come back. Youth would not return. The life she might have lived was gone forever. The authorities closed her case with careful language. They admitted mistakes without naming guilt. No one was punished. No one lost position or honor. The system protected itself, just as it always had. Seraphina was free, but justice remained unfinished. She lived quietly after that, not hidden, but not seeking attention either. Her beauty was still there, though softer now, shaped by loss rather than youth. People who met her noticed something else more powerful than her face. They noticed her stillness, her strength, the depth in her eyes that came from surviving what should have destroyed her. Sometimes people asked about her past. She chose carefully what to share. She did not want to be known only as the woman who was chained. She wanted to exist beyond that story. Yet she also understood that forgetting would allow the same cruelty to happen again. Her story spread slowly, passed in quiet conversations, written in private notes, remembered by those who cared about truth. It never became famous. It was never officially recorded as a great injustice, but it lived on as a warning. Seraphina learned that freedom does not erase pain. It only gives pain space to breathe. Healing was not sudden. Some wounds never healed fully, but she learned to live with them, to build a life around what remained instead of what was taken. In the end,
Seraphina understood something important. She had been chained not because of beauty, but because fear needed a target, because people chose comfort over courage, because silence was easier than standing up for someone who was different. She had survived that silence. Her freedom came too late to give her back what was lost, but it came in time to let her reclaim her name, her voice, and her humanity. And though the world never truly apologized, her existence itself became a quiet answer to the lie that had imprisoned her. She was not dangerous. She was never the problem. The real danger had always been what people were willing to do when fear was allowed to decide what was right.